A struggling man stumbles upon 3 children left alone, and as he learns more about them, he's stunned to uncover the truth about their mother. The rain poured down like an unyielding sheet that night, transforming the village roads into a murky labyrinth. Josh hurried along, his head lowered against the sharp wind, when a sound cut through the storm, stopping him cold. It was a cry, soft, frail, almost lost in the relentless rain. Following the sound, he arrived at a lone tree where a young girl was crouched, shielding 2 small bundles from the rain. "Please don't come closer," she called out, her voice trembling. Though her tone was laced with fear, Josh could feel the raw desperation in her words, so he halted. "I'm not here to harm you. I just want to help," he assured her, keeping his voice gentle but steady, hoping to calm her. The girl, Pamela, looked up at him with wide, tearful eyes. They're my brothers. They have no one else," she admitted, clutching the little ones as if letting go might make them vanish. Seeing the tiny, pale faces of the twins, Gary and Sean, tugged at Josh's heart. "They're so delicate," he thought, feeling a surge of compassion. "You don't have to do this by yourself." "Let me help," he urged, reaching his hand out patiently. Pamela's gaze shifted between fear and hope. After a shaky breath, she nodded. "Please, help us," she whispered, allowing him to approach. Without hesitation, Josh picked up one of the twins, cradling the small, chilly body close to his chest. "My house isn't far. Let's get you all warmed up," he said, wrapping his coat around the baby. Pamela tried to stand, but her legs wobbled under her. "Here, lean on me," Josh offered, supporting her with an arm around her shoulders. Every step felt unstable beneath them, but Josh's grip remained firm, guiding them towards safety. "They're so cold, and I'm scared," Pamela murmured, almost like sharing a secret. "I know," he replied softly, "but you're not alone anymore. We'll get through this together." Though the distance to Josh's house was short, for Pamela, each moment stretched into a long, uncertain journey. When they finally arrived, he shouldered open the door, revealing a small, cozy room that seemed a world away from the chilly night outside. "Come on in, quick," he urged, guiding her across the threshold. The warmth from the fireplace instantly wrapped around them, a stark relief from the cold outside. Pamela nearly sank to the floor as the comforting heat filled her with a sense of safety she hadn't felt in days. "Set them down by the fire," Josh instructed while he laid blankets on the floor for the little ones. "Everything will be all right," he repeated, mostly to himself, as if saying it out loud might somehow make it true for the small group now in his care. Pamela sat down beside the twins, looking over at Josh with tired but grateful eyes. "I don't even know how to thank you," she began softly. Josh held up a hand, gently stopping her. "No need for thanks. The important thing is that you're all safe," he replied, offering her a reassuring smile that seemed to lift the weight from her shoulders. He then handed her a steaming cup of tea. "Here, this will help settle you." She took the cup with trembling hands, letting its warmth seep into her while the rising steam brushed her face like a gentle embrace. The twins, now warm and full, finally drifted into sleep, their tiny bodies relaxing as they lay nestled together. Josh watched them with a tender expression, as though they were already part of his own family. "You're a good man, Josh," Pamela said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I was so afraid. I didn't think anyone would care." Kneeling beside her, Josh placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "There's still kindness out there, even when it feels like it's lost," he assured her. "As long as I'm here, you'll be taken care of." His promise was heartfelt, filled with quiet strength and determination. Pamela finally let herself unwind, exhaling a shaky breath that seemed to carry away her worries. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, leaning back and closing her eyes. But for Josh, the night was far from over. While Pamela and the twins rested, he sat by the fire, watching the flames dance as thoughts of what lay ahead filled his mind. Morning light began to seep through the window of his humble home, casting a gentle glow over them all, signaling the start of a new day. As the warmth of the fire still radiated through the room, Pamela sat quietly in a nearby chair, watching the twins rest peacefully. Josh, noticing the tension in the young girl's expression, walked over gently and sat beside her. "Pamela, you're safe now, but I need to understand what happened," he said, his voice calm and caring. "Why were you alone on the street with your brothers? Where is your mother?" Pamela bit her lip, trying hard to hold back tears. She was only a child, yet she had witnessed and endured things no adult should ever have to face. "My mother. Her name is Sandra," she began, her voice wavering yet resolute. "She worked for a bad man named Lawrence. He was rich, powerful. Everyone was scared of him. He and my mother, they had an affair." Josh nodded, encouraging her to continue. "And then what happened?" he asked, his stomach tightening with dread at what he might hear next. Pamela drew in a deep breath, readying herself to revisit painful memories. "Mum, she got pregnant with Gary and Sean. When she told Lawrence, he got really angry. He said he didn't want kids, didn't care about them, and he was too important to be bothered with all that." Her voice broke as she whispered, trembling. "But Mom loved us. She wanted him to take responsibility and recognize the twins, even if it meant taking a risk. She told him he needed to be a father, that he had to help take care of us." Pamela looked down at the floor, but Lawrence got even angrier. He told her if she didn't leave and stay silent, awful things would happen to all of us. He said he had the power to make anything happen. Her voice grew darker as she remembered the threats. Josh gently held her hand, giving her what comfort he could. "That must have been incredibly hard for your mother," he said softly, his tone full of empathy. Pamela nodded in response. Tears welled up in her eyes. Mom was terrified. She knew how dangerous he could be, so one night she shook me awake and whispered, "Get the little ones." "We needed to leave," she said. "We had to get far away." Her voice cracked as she tried to explain, and her face streaked with tears. She promised to catch up with us and that she'd meet us later. But she never came. I waited, Josh. I waited, but she didn't come back. She admitted, her voice barely a whisper as she broke down. Josh's heart clenched, feeling the weight of her words. He could picture Sandra's desperation, the agony of making such a heartbreaking choice, sending her children off to protect them from a man as ruthless as Lawrence. "So you ran with your brothers to save their lives. You were incredibly brave, Pamela," Josh said, admiring her courage. Though still so young, she had faced a nightmare with remarkable strength. Pamela wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, pulling herself together. "I just want Mum to come back. I just want her to be safe," she murmured, her voice heavy with a sadness that no child should carry. "We'll find her, Pamela," Josh said gently. "I promise. We'll look for her, and Lawrence will answer for everything he's done." Determined, he knew Pamela's story exposed both the grave danger they faced and Lawrence's cruelty. Willing to go to any length to protect his reputation, as Pamela, exhausted, finally drifted to sleep, Josh sat beside the twins, mind racing through his next steps. He knew he was stepping into a treacherous fight, but the lives of these 3 children, and Sandra's, dependent on his courage. Lawrence's influence was formidable, but Josh was ready to face it. With Pamela's revelation lingering in his mind, he knew he had to act fast. He wasn't naive. He knew he couldn't take on someone as powerful and ruthless as Lawrence on his own. There was one person he could count on, Ryan, an old friend and former cop who, despite leaving the force, was known for his unshakable integrity and commitment to justice. "Ryan, I really need your help," Josh thought to himself as he prepared to leave. He knew he was about to gamble with everything he had, but he didn't see another way out. When he reached Ryan's modest house, Ryan opened the door with a surprised expression. "Josh, what are you doing here at this hour?" he asked, noticing the tension etched on his friend's face. Josh hesitated briefly, but knew there was no time to lose. "Ryan, I'm in trouble. I need your help. I found 3 kids, and they're in real danger because of Lawrence," Josh said, his voice filled with urgency. Ryan's face darkened at the mention of Lawrence, an old nemesis from the past. "Come in, let's talk," he replied, his tone a mix of concern and curiosity. Seated at the kitchen table, Josh began to explain everything. Pamela's shaking hands, Lawrence's threats, Sandra's disappearance, and the looming danger over the twins. Ryan listened intently, his expression growing graver with each new detail. "Lawrence has always been ruthless, but I never imagined he'd go this far," Ryan said, his gaze fixed in deep thought. "Coming to me was the right call, but we have to tread carefully. Lawrence has eyes and ears everywhere," he warned, the weight of the situation settling on them both. "I know it's risky, but I can't just sit back and watch," Josh replied, his voice thick with emotion. "These kids need protection, and Sandra, she could be in real danger. I can't let Lawrence keep hurting innocent people." He looked at Ryan, his eyes pleading for support. Ryan took a deep breath, feeling the full gravity of the task ahead. "You're right, Josh. I'll do everything I can to help, but we need to be smart about this. Lawrence isn't going down without a fight," Ryan said, already forming a plan in his mind. They spent hours talking through each detail, carefully crafting their next moves. "First, we need solid evidence. Without it, there's no case against Lawrence," Ryan said, getting up and starting to pace. "I still have contacts in the police force. A few of them can be trusted, but we have to stay under the radar. One slip, and he'll know everything," he cautioned. Josh's mind was racing, processing everything at lightning speed as he agreed. He knew this was the only real shot to keep Pamela, Gary, and Sean safe. "Let's start with the basics," he suggested, his tone filled with hope. "Finding Sandra. If we can locate her, she could testify against Lawrence and help shield them." Ryan nodded, his resolve matching Josh's. "We need to figure out where she is, assuming Lawrence hasn't already stashed her away somewhere. At the same time, we've got to begin gathering evidence against him. Anything that can tie Lawrence to the threats he's made against Sandra and the kids." The wheels of investigation already turning in his mind, Ryan laid a firm hand on Josh's shoulder before they parted. "Josh, I know you're doing this for the kids, but I need you to realize this isn't going to be easy. Lawrence won't back down. He'll go to any length to protect himself. You've got to be ready for whatever comes." Josh felt the weight of Ryan's warning, but met it with unwavering determination. "I understand, Ryan. These kids deserve a life without fear. I won't let Lawrence ruin that for them." With a plan in place and fresh resolve, Josh returned home to Pamela and the twins. The path ahead looked daunting, but with Ryan's support, he felt a renewed sense of hope. In the days that followed, Josh and Ryan set to work, relentless in their mission to gather the evidence needed to take Lawrence down and keep Pamela, Gary, and Sean safe. Those first few weeks were thick with tension. Each move they made was calculated, every word spoken in hushed tones, wary of Lawrence's far-reaching influence. Ryan, a former cop, knew the drill all too well. "We have to be thorough, Josh," he'd remind him often. "Lawrence has got eyes and ears everywhere. One wrong step, and it could all come crashing down." Relying on old connections, Ryan discreetly reached out to a few trusted former colleagues in law enforcement, requesting their help under the radar. He couldn't disclose everything, but he needed details on Sandra's location and any files that might tie Lawrence to his unlawful dealings. He relied on his network, hoping to gather essential clues. Meanwhile, Josh kept up appearances, looking after the kids and acting as if everything was normal, though inside he was plagued with worry for Pamela and the twins. "They can't know what we're doing," Ryan reminded him. "Lawrence is clever, but we need to be even smarter." The first lead came through one of Ryan's contacts, who, though initially hesitant, eventually offered valuable insight into Lawrence's shadowy activities. "There are records of large, suspicious money transfers hidden among legitimate transactions," Ryan explained as he handed over the documents. "It'll be tough to prove, but not impossible." Josh, though not fully grasping the technicalities, sensed they were heading in the right direction. "This could be the tip of the iceberg, Ryan. We need to keep digging," he said, feeling a surge of determination as their pursuit for evidence continued. One of the tensest moments came when Ryan tracked down a property Lawrence used as a base for his most secretive operations. "We've got a lead on a possible hideout, but it's risky. We need to get in and out without leaving a trace," Ryan cautioned. Josh didn't hesitate to join him. "I can't sit this one out. If it means helping save Sydney and the kids, I'll take the chance," he replied firmly. The break-in was a true test of nerves. Moving in complete silence, tension hung in the air with every step. Inside, they found a hidden room where incriminating documents lay secured. "Here it is," Ryan whispered, opening a concealed safe. "These documents tie Lawrence to multiple illegal operations, including threats and bribery. This is what we needed," he said, a mix of relief and caution in his voice. Josh clutched the documents, feeling the gravity of their discovery. "This could bring him down," he murmured, his heart a mix of hope and trepidation. Though they'd secured vital evidence, the stakes rose sharply. Lawrence began sensing that someone was out to expose him. His crew started keeping a closer watch on anyone he saw as a threat, and the pressure on Josh and Ryan grew stronger. "We need to be more cautious than ever, Josh," Ryan cautioned, never letting Lawrence out of his sight. "He's making moves, which means we're getting close. But it also means things are getting more dangerous." Josh understood the stakes were climbing higher, and backing out was no longer an option. "We're inches away from exposing Lawrence. We can't pull out now," he replied, his voice steady, though he couldn't shake the fear growing inside him. With the evidence in place, Josh and Ryan prepared to take the next step. Bringing Lawrence down was now a matter of timing, and every moment mattered. In the days that followed, their lives became a blend of hurried planning and cautious action as they laid the final steps of their plan to expose Lawrence. The evidence was organized, and their plan was carefully mapped out. Josh felt a mix of hope and anxiety as they neared their goal. More than anything, he wanted Pamela, Gary, and Sean safe, and he held out hope that they might find Sydney, though her fate was uncertain with each passing day. He trusted Ryan completely. The former cop had been a loyal friend and a reliable ally throughout this journey. On the night they planned to make their final move, Ryan suggested they meet at a remote spot, away from Lawrence's spies and anyone who might interfere. "Josh, we need to be extra cautious. Let's meet somewhere secure. Bring the evidence, and we'll take it straight to the press and authorities," Ryan said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Josh made all the necessary preparations, ensuring Pamela and the twins were safe before heading out. "Don't stay away too long, Josh. I'm worried," Pamela whispered, clutching his hand tightly. Josh kneeled to meet her eyes, offering a gentle smile. "I promise I'll be back soon. When this is over, you'll all be safe," he assured her, doing his best to hide his own fear. She nodded, trying to appear brave, though the worry in her gaze was clear. The meeting place was an abandoned old factory, its broken windows and moss-covered walls emanating an air of decay. The silhouettes of rusty machinery cast eerie shadows under the few dim lights that still flickered, heightening the sense of danger all around. Josh stepped into the room, instantly feeling the damp chill that hung in the air. His footsteps echoed sharply on the concrete floor, where he found Ryan already there, waiting with a look of intense focus. "Did you bring it all?" Ryan asked, his voice flat and to the point. "Yeah, it's all here," Josh replied, handing over a hefty folder crammed with damning evidence. Ryan took the file, flipping through it with a keen eye. "This should finally put an end to it," Josh said, trying to push down the strange mix of relief and unease brewing within him. "Yes, it will," Ryan replied. But there was something in Ryan's tone that sent a cold shiver down Josh's spine. It was a tone devoid of the familiarity they'd once shared, and an instinctual chill gripped Josh. "Ryan, what's going on?" he asked, his voice shifting from expectation to worry. Before he could react, he felt a hard blow to the back of his head. He staggered, falling to his knees, his vision blurring as pain pulsed through his skull. As he struggled to regain his balance, he became aware of figures emerging from the shadows, hulking men with harsh, unfriendly expressions closing in around him. "Ryan, what is this?" Josh yelled, desperate for an answer. Ryan moved closer, his face showing not a hint of guilt, but a look of cold calculation. "Sorry, Josh, but business is business," he said, his voice chillingly indifferent, cutting into Josh like a blade. Josh tried to process what he was hearing, but the sharp sting of betrayal left him stunned. "You? You've been working with him all along?" he managed to ask, his voice shaky, clinging to the faint hope that this was all a terrible dream. "I did what needed to be done," Ryan replied, devoid of remorse. "Lawrence paid me well to make sure you didn't meddle. He knew everything from the start. Every single move you made, Josh. You never stood a chance." The words struck Josh to his core, each one landing with crushing weight. "I trusted you." "Why, Ryan? Why betray me like this?" Josh murmured, feeling his strength drain from his body. "Because power and money speak louder." "They always have," Ryan said, his voice cold as ice, as Lawrence's men seized Josh and dragged him to the far end of the factory. "Take him to the usual spot. The boss wants a word before wrapping this up," Ryan commanded, his voice now stripped of any warmth or mercy. Josh attempted to resist, but the enforcers quickly subdued him due to his still disoriented state from the blow and shock from the betrayal. The fear and pain gnawed at him, almost suffocating. Pamela, the twins, Sandra? His thoughts raced with dread over the promises he couldn't keep. As they dragged him out of the warehouse, the heavy door clanged shut behind him, echoing like the end of all hope. The cold night air wrapped around them as they reached the car, and Josh was shoved into the back seat without care. His mind was foggy, his head pounding, but one word pulsed through his thoughts. Betrayal. Someone he'd trusted fully had sold him out, leaving him now in the clutches of a man who had brought only pain to those he loved. "It can't end this way, can it?" he thought, clinging to a faint ember of hope, though it flickered more faintly with each passing second. The car started up, and with it, Josh was driven to an uncertain and perilous destination. His life was at risk, yes, but worse than that was the knowledge that he'd let down those he cared for. Worry for Pamela, Gary, and Sean gnawed at him, poisoning his thoughts as he strained to think of any possible escape. Bound and exhausted, his hope dimmed. Yet he struggled on. Meanwhile, as Josh was swept away into the night, little Pamela lay tossing and turning in the small, cramped room where she and her brothers hid. Her young heart sensed something was wrong, an anxious feeling that kept sleep far from her. Josh's last words before he left echoed in her mind. "I promise, I'll be back soon." But the silence stretched on, each passing moment making it harder to bear. "What if he needs me?" she thought, glancing over at the twins who slept soundly, oblivious to the dread weighing on her. Pamela made the decision to go while feeling both fear and courage. Careful not to wake her brothers, she slipped from the room, moving quietly like a shadow. The rain began to fall again, a steady drizzle soaking the empty streets as she crept through them, guided only by the faint pull of her heart and the memory of where Josh had disappeared. The biting wind chilled her to the bone, but the strength growing in her heart was fiercer than the night. Under her breath, she murmured a quiet mantra, like a prayer. After what felt like ages, Pamela finally reached the rundown, deserted factory, where shadows twisted under the dim glow of scattered lights. She moved along the damp, crumbling walls, hoping to slip inside unnoticed. The silence was thick, heavy, with a sense of something dangerous lurking just out of sight, making her swallow hard. As she neared a shattered window, Pamela took a cautious glance inside, and what she saw almost made her heart stop. The men Josh had so completely trusted were all around him, and Ryan stood beside them with a stern and unreadable expression on his face. Pamela's stomach dropped. Ryan had betrayed Josh. The fear clawed at her insides, but something deep within refused to let her back down. She knew she had to act, but what could a 7-year-old girl do in the face of such danger? Her eyes fell on Josh's phone lying on the ground, just a few steps from where Ryan stood. Her pulse quickened, yet she felt her resolve harden, overpowering her fear. She needed evidence, something that would both protect Josh and reveal Ryan for who he truly was. Silently, she moved through the shadows, her small feet barely making a sound until she could grab the phone undetected. With trembling fingers, she activated the recording function and began capturing the exchange. "I did what you wanted, Lawrence. He's here, ready to be handled," Ryan said, his voice ice cold, sending a shiver down Pamela's spine. She bit her lip, fighting back tears. "We had an arrangement, Ryan. You deliver Josh, and I'll take it from there." "No more slip-ups," a voice replied, one she'd never heard before but instantly recognized as Lawrence's. Each word felt like a stab to her heart. Yet Pamela knew she couldn't falter. She kept recording, catching every awful detail of Lawrence's scheme, his threats against Sandra and the twins, and how Ryan had been plotting against Josh from the start. She knew this recording was her only hope to save the people she loved. When the call finally ended, Pamela ducked behind a stack of boxes, clutching her phone tightly to her chest as if it were her lifeline. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it echoing in her ears, her body tense with fear that someone might hear. "I have to get out of here. I need to bring this to someone who can help," she thought, struggling to keep her panic at bay. She watched as the men began to lead Josh outside, their voices low and harsh. Seeing her chance, Pamela took a deep breath, slipped out of her hiding place, and darted to the window she had come through. She squeezed through, stumbling into the cold night air. As soon as she hit the ground, she ran, her small, determined steps pounding against the wet pavement. The weight of what she had witnessed pressed heavily on her young shoulders, but her determination only grew. "I have to save Josh. I have to save Mom." She repeated these words like a mantra, each step driving her forward, even as her lungs burned and her legs ached. The night was cold, the damp air chilling her to the bone, but the heat of adrenaline kept her going, refusing to let her stop. Eventually, she reached the police station, her last hope. She threw open the doors, drenched and out of breath, stumbling into the quiet, brightly lit lobby. A few officers looked up in surprise as she burst in, her small frame shaking from exhaustion and fear. "Please help! They've taken my friend! They're going to hurt Josh!" she gasped, her voice breaking as she held up the phone, clutching it so tightly her knuckles were white. One of the officers, an older man with a calm, gentle face, knelt beside her, putting a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Calm down, sweetheart. Take a deep breath," he said softly. "Now tell me, what happened? Who are these people?" Pamela took a shaky breath, her voice quivering as she tried to explain. She recounted what she had seen, each word trembling but steady, her determination clear even in her fear. "They're going to hurt him. I recorded everything," she whispered, handing the phone to the officer. He looked down at the device in his hand, his face tightening as he realized the gravity of the situation. "You were very brave," he told her, in a serious, low voice, nodding to his fellow officers, who immediately began listening to the recording, preparing to take action. Despite the relief of finding help, Pamela's fear for Josh and her mum still twisted painfully inside her. "Please, save Josh and my mom," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with a fierce urgency, a desperation that only love could drive. The room filled with a tense energy as the officers listened intently. Each second stretched painfully, heightening the nerves of both the officers and Pamela, who stood in the corner, her eyes wide, her heart racing. She watched, clinging to hope, knowing that this recording might be the key to saving Josh, but knowing too that they had little time and there was no room for mistakes. "We need to move now," the sergeant in charge commanded, his voice firm and grave, the weight of the situation clear. "Lawrence won't hesitate to hurt Josh or anyone else in his way. We're dealing with some dangerous criminals here. People." As the rescue plan was meticulously outlined, the gravity of the situation hung heavily over everyone involved. One wrong move, and lives could be at stake, the sergeant warned, his voice steely with urgency. Pamela stood nearby, her face pale with worry, her thoughts unable to escape from Josh and her mother. "Please, keep him safe," she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at the sergeant. He met her gaze, a quiet strength and compassion in his eyes that managed to ease her fear, if only slightly. "I promise, we'll do everything in our power to bring them back safely," he assured her, before stepping away to focus on the final coordination of the mission. Pamela's heart throbbed with worry, yet she clung to his words, holding on to the fragile hope that everything would somehow be okay. The officers moved with intense precision, double-checking their equipment and going over each detail of the plan. Every second counts and the tension was palpable. Pamela's recorded information, which had revealed Josh's location, became their primary advantage and the beacon guiding their strategy. "Speed and silence are our allies here," the sergeant instructed his team, his voice cutting through the atmosphere like a knife. "Lawrence may have more men than we expect. We can't risk him knowing we're here before it's too late." The team departed in their vehicles, their faces set with a fierce determination. The silence in the car was heavy, reflecting the seriousness of what lay ahead. As they drew closer to the old mansion, a remote, looming structure where Lawrence had set up his operations and where Josh was being held, the tension reached a breaking point. The air in the vehicle crackled with adrenaline. "Remember, our primary goal is to rescue Josh and any other hostages," the sergeant emphasized, his gaze hard as he looked each officer in the eyes. "Lawrence's arrest is crucial, but saving lives takes precedence." The clock was ticking, and with every second the risk grew. The car came to a stop at a discreet distance from the mansion, and the officers quietly exited, moving like shadows through the thick vegetation that surrounded the property. Pamela's detailed description of the mansion's entrance and layout became their roadmap, guiding their steps in the dark. We'll split up. 2 of you take the front to cause a distraction. The rest, we'll go in from the back. Keep it quick and clean, the sergeant ordered, and the team quickly assumed their positions. The tension was almost suffocating, but their focus held strong, and they prepared to move with silent precision. The entry was executed with flawless coordination. The 2 officers at the front burst through the doors, creating enough chaos to draw Lawrence's men into a frantic response. Meanwhile, the rest slipped in through the back, gliding through dimly lit corridors with swift, calculated movements. The mansion erupted with shouts and bursts of gunfire, creating an atmosphere of controlled chaos that rippled through the halls. "Search for Josh. He has to be somewhere close by," barked the sergeant, his voice sharp as the officers combed through the dimly lit corridors and tight corners. Each man held his weapon firmly, eyes scanning every shadow and crevice, alert to any movement. Meanwhile, in the basement's cold, pitch-black room, Josh strained to hear the shouts and footsteps from above. The noise broke through his own sense of isolation, sparking a small, fierce hope in his chest. "They're here." They came, he thought, writhing against the ropes binding his wrists. He could feel the rough fibers digging into his skin, but adrenaline urged him to fight through the pain. Lawrence's repeated threats had gnawed at his spirit, and the hours spent alone in darkness had left him weak. Still, a fierce determination to survive, stronger than he ever thought possible, kept him going. He knew he had to make it out, for his own sake, and for the children he had promised to protect. Giving up now was simply not an option. The door burst open suddenly, flooding the small room with the harsh beam of flashlight after flashlight. The light temporarily blinded Josh, who squinted. Then he saw them, the uniforms of the officers who had come to rescue him. "Josh, are you alive?" one of the officers called as he hurried over, his face etched with worry. I'm okay," Josh managed, his voice scratchy and faint from hours of silence, but the relief that swept through him was undeniable. The officers quickly cut the ropes from his wrists and helped him to his feet. His muscles screamed in protest, but he leaned gratefully on their support. "Let's get you out of here," the sergeant said, his grip on Josh firm and reassuring. Just as they began to make their way toward the exit, a harsh voice broke through the silence. "No one gets out of here alive." Lawrence's voice echoed as he stepped out from one of the narrow corridors, a gun gripped tightly in his hand. His face twisted with hatred, his eyes wild with desperation. He fixed his gaze on Josh and the officers with a look that promised danger. The sergeant instantly moved in front of Josh, shielding him. Raising his own weapon, he trained it on Lawrence, his voice unshakable as he commanded, "Drop the gun, Lawrence. This is the end of the line for you. You're surrounded." But Lawrence, pushed to the brink of madness, only sneered, an eerie smile spreading across his face that sent a chill down Josh's spine. "It's over for you. Not for me," he said with venom, pulling the trigger. A brief, terrifying silence followed the gunshot's deafening crack in the room. Josh felt his heart stop as he waited, the world frozen in a single breath. Then he saw the bullet's impact on the wall beside him. The sergeant had deflected it at the last possible moment. In a swift, practiced move, the officers sprang into action, disarming Lawrence and tackling him to the ground. They had him handcuffed in moments, preventing any further harm. The sergeant looked down at Lawrence, now subdued, with a steely expression. "You're going to pay for everything you've done, Lawrence," he said, his voice filled with contempt. Josh, still trembling from the ordeal, felt a wave of overwhelming relief and gratitude wash over him as he looked at the team that had saved his life. "Thank you," he whispered. He thought he wouldn't survive. Josh clung to the sergeant's shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "You're strong, Josh. And someone didn't give up on you, someone who helped us arrive just in time," the sergeant replied, his voice calm but filled with warmth. The hint of a smile on the sergeant's face told Josh everything he needed to know. He knew exactly who the sergeant was talking about. The rescue was a success, but Josh, shaken to the core, was brought to the police station. Pamela was already waiting there, her heart heavy with fear and hope as she anticipated his arrival. As he walked through the door, relief flooded her face. She ran toward him, throwing her arms around him with all the strength she could muster. "I was terrified you wouldn't come back," she murmured, her voice trembling as she pressed her face against his chest, the tears she'd held back now freely falling. Josh held her close, feeling his own tears as they slid down his face. "I made a promise, didn't I?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life, Pamela. You were incredible." The soft morning light filtered through the police station's windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. It seemed to melt away the lingering shadows of fear and uncertainty that had haunted Pamela, Josh, and the twins. The air, once tense and fraught, now held an undeniable sense of relief. Lawrence was behind bars at last, his grip on their lives broken. Justice, which had once seemed so out of reach, was now in sight. Josh, his body still showing the scars of the struggle but his heart finally at peace, watched the children as they played in a corner of the waiting room. A gentle smile spread across his face as he saw the light-hearted innocence that had survived, despite everything they'd endured. Word of Lawrence's arrest spread quickly through the town, and a wave of astonishment and relief swept through the community. Lawrence had ruled through fear, wielding power by manipulating and intimidating others. But now his reign of terror was over. He won't hurt anyone again, Josh thought, his heart swelling with gratitude for everyone who had helped him, especially Pamela, whose courage and determination had been the key to breaking Lawrence's web of lies and cruelty. "You saved us all, kiddo," Josh said softly, gently brushing Pamela's hair as she looked up at him with a shy smile. Yet even though Lawrence was gone, one question remained unresolved. What had happened to Sandra? During the rescue operation, the police had uncovered leads that suggested her possible location. Now, all they could do was wait, hearts clenched with anticipation, each moment stretching endlessly as they hoped. After what felt like an endless wait, an officer finally entered the room. His face carried an expression of relief mixed with deep exhaustion, signaling he had news. "We have good news," he announced, and his words immediately drew every eye in the room. "We found Sandra," he continued, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "She was being kept on a remote property, far from here, but she's safe. The doctors are with her now, and it looks like she'll make a full recovery." His words hung in the air like a lifeline of hope, pulling everyone from the depths of despair. Tears welled up, and sounds of soft sobbing filled the room as everyone breathed in the relief. "Mom, she's alive," she murmured, her voice faint, as if she was saying it just to convince herself it was real. Her words trembled with disbelief. Josh reached over, pulling her into a tight hug, his own eyes wet with tears he could no longer hold back. "I told you we'd find her," he whispered, his voice choked with the surge of emotions that had been bottled up for so long. His promise, which had carried them through the darkest moments, was finally fulfilled. In the days that followed, their lives turned toward healing and recovery. Sandra was reunited with her children, though she was still weak and visibly shaken by what she had endured. The scene of her reunion with Pamela, Gary, and Sean moved everyone present. She gathered them in her arms, hugging each of them with every ounce of strength she had left, her tears of joy mingling with theirs. It was as though she was trying to make up for all the lost time in that one embrace. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said softly, her voice shaking as her hands gently traced the contours of the twins' faces, as if to reassure herself that they were real. "Mom, we're together now, and we're going to be okay," Pamela replied, her voice wavering as she struggled to hold back her own tears. Everyone present was able to feel the warmth of her words' love. Watching the reunion from a few steps away, Josh felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. He had kept his promise to keep the children safe and to bring Sandra back to them. But beyond that, he realized he had discovered a strength within himself that he never knew existed. "You are an incredible family," he said, when he finally walked over to them, his voice sincere and filled with admiration. Sandra, still overwhelmed with emotion, looked up at Josh, her gaze filled with gratitude and respect. "I don't know how to thank you, Josh. You saved my children's lives, and mine too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but full of heartfelt sincerity. "There's no need to thank me. I'm just glad I could help," Josh replied, offering a gentle smile. He knew that despite the trials they had endured, the journey had forged unbreakable bonds between them. What had started as a simple act of kindness on that stormy night had blossomed into something far deeper. They had become a family, connected not just by blood, but by the strength of love, hope, and resilience in the face of adversity. The future, once bleak and filled with uncertainty, now held a glimmer of promise and hope for better days. As the weeks passed, life slowly found a new rhythm. Pamela, Gary, Sean, and Sandra settled into Josh's home, which had now become a sanctuary for them all. The village, once overshadowed by Lawrence's dark influence, gradually transformed into a place filled with renewal, healing, and hope. Moved by Josh and Pamela's incredible bravery, the community began to rebuild their lives, grounded in the belief that, despite every challenge and setback, goodness had ultimately won. The peace they had yearned for was finally within reach, and they found themselves surrounded by friends who had walked a similar path. For Josh and his new family, what once seemed out of reach, a life overflowing with love, hope, and a future worth looking forward to, was now their reality. Although they carried the scars of past battles, they knew that, together, they could face anything that came their way. Josh often reminded himself of a simple truth. No matter how dark the night, the sun always rises, bringing with it a new chance to start again. As we come to the end of this story, it invites us to pause and reflect. Would you, in their place, have Josh's courage to persevere, Pamela's unbreakable spirit, or the selfless love that Sandra shared? This journey reminds us that in the darkest and most trying times, love and hope can still guide our way. Pursuing justice may be hard and painful, but every struggle, every effort is deeply worth it. Take a moment to consider, how can we apply that same strength in our everyday lives? If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications to stay connected with more stories that inspire and uplift.